Okay, it is 12:30. So I'm going to welcome everybody and begin. So hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Mayreli Sacristi. I'm Director of Women and Gender in International Development at the Center for International Research, Education, and Development here at Virginia Tech. Shreya Satai over there with the same backdrop as me as the graduate assistant that's supporting this discussion series, and she's a grad student at the School of Engineering here at Virginia Tech. So welcome to our hybrid Women and Gender and International Development discussion series. This is our second event of the semester. I see we have Bernice Owusu-Brown, who was our first speaker in person and hybrid down there. So we're very happy you could join us for the discussion featuring Jennifer Langill, who you will hear from soon. As of this morning, we had 22 people registered for today's event. So in addition to many diverse folks from Virginia Tech, we have people who join us from Nairobi, and I see that she checked in here. And so please do put your check-in in the chat so we can see. But I'm going to just mention some of the folks that joined. So from Nairobi, that's from the Kenya, the gender environment specialist from the Kenya, from the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, different U.S. universities such as Duke and Iowa State, and also an NGO, Course International. So welcome to everybody, and I hope everybody is able to join that signed up. So please note that our event will be recorded and available on our website later. So for the Zoom participants, by staying on now, you're consenting to be recorded. You can turn off your camera and turn off your picture if you don't want your image recorded. So before introducing our speaker, I'd like to invite you to reflect on our Virginia Tech's land and labor recognition. So Virginia Tech acknowledges that we live and work on the Tutelo-Monacan people's homeland, and we recognize their continued relationship with their lands and waterways. We further acknowledge that legislation and practices like the Morrill Act of 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands, both locally and in Western territories. We understand that honoring Native peoples without explicit material commitments falls short of our institutional responsibilities. Through sustained, transparent, and meaningful engagement with the Tutelo-Monacan peoples and other Native nations, we commit to changing the trajectory of Virginia Tech's history by increasing Indigenous student, staff, and faculty recruitment and retention, diversifying course offerings, and meeting the growing needs of all Virginia tribes and supporting their sovereignty. We also must recognize that enslaved Black people generated revenue and resources used to establish Virginia Tech and were prohibited from attending until 1953. Through inclusivity, the institutional and individual commitment to ut prosum that I may serve in the spirit of community, diversity, and excellence, we commit to advancing a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. Okay, some brief housekeeping notes. So the event, as the slideshow explained, will last approximately 45 minutes. That's Jennifer's presentation will be about 25 minutes, and then followed by 20 to 25 minutes of question and answer. All of the participants joining via Zoom will be muted to enable the speaker to present without interruption. And after the speaker's presentation, people can raise their hands through the virtual button, and we will ask you to unmute yourself to talk directly to the speaker, or you can post your comments and questions at any time in the chat box, and I will be collecting those on a Google Doc and can read them out. So if you don't want to raise your hand and bring them up yourself. So, but please wait for your turn to speak so that we can avoid interruptions and maintain netiquette. Isn't that a crazy new word? Okay, not that new anymore. All right. So in order for our discussion to be as rich as it can be, we need everyone to be respectful and treat all participants with kindness and consideration without discriminatory behavior. So again, the webinar is being recorded and you will have access to it via our website. In advance, I'd like to ask you to please answer the survey that we will put into the chat and also email to you at the end. And you can tweet us by tagging or X us by tagging us at WGT_VT. Okay, now you really want to hear about Jennifer and from Jennifer. So to introduce Jennifer Langill, she's currently a doctoral fellow with the Department of Geography at McGill University in Canada. I've been lucky to work with Jennifer on a special issue for Gender, Place, and Culture on feminist geographies of livelihoods, which she is guest editing together with Dr. Ann Oberhauser of Iowa State University. Jennifer's work falls at the intersection of feminist geographies and critical development, drawing on feminist approaches to livelihoods and political ecology. She's specifically interested in the relationships between social and political marginalization, livelihood activities, and individual life worlds. Her current doctoral research examines intergenerational livelihood transitions for Hmong populations in northern Thailand and the intersectional outcomes of these political, economic, and environmentally driven changes. Her first publication from this research was recently published in Gender, Place, and Culture. And I think we're gonna, if you are okay with that, Jennifer, we're gonna put that PDF into the chat. Yes, okay. So prior to this, Jennifer studied human environment relations in the Peruvian Amazon, specifically flooding, gendered livelihood seasonality, and environmental change for floodplain communities. She's also consulted for the Alliance of Biodiversity International and the International Center for Tropical Agriculture on gendered migration and land restoration in Burkina Faso. So I just want to add that Jennifer is really a rock star. I'm really excited to have been able to work with her for these last 4 years as we did the feminist livelihood sessions at the American Association of Geography Conference. And she's got just really interesting publications. So thank you so much for joining us. And she still hasn't graduated with her PhD and she's doing all these amazing things. So thank you. The title of her talk is Gender Transformations Embedded in Livelihood Transitions, Changes and Continuities in Hmong Gender Roles and Relations in Northern Thailand. So now it is your turn. So if you want to share your, and I will mute myself.
Hi, everyone. Could someone give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Perfect, and you can see my screen? Wonderful. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you very much for being here. And thank you in particular to Maria Lisa for inviting me and for the introduction. I had the privilege of attending the Women and Gender in Development Conference at Virginia Tech in 2019. So it is wonderful to be back in this space, even if virtually. And I appreciate the invitation to join you today. I am excited to share a paper from my dissertation with you that focuses on the interrelationships between changes in gender roles and relations and so-called processes of development. Conceptually, this paper draws on long-standing feminist critiques of development, including development theory, development practice, and development as a concept in and of its own. Feminist critiques of development have created a wealth of empirical and conceptual contributions, including the gendered particularities within local contexts, gendered economies, including gendered labor distributions and gendered access to capital and other assets, as well as gendered outcomes of development and forms of change. While I focus on gender in particular as a site of difference in this talk, I also want to highlight important intersectional and post-colonial work on multiple interlocking subjectivities that are always at play within and beyond gender systems. Despite decades of important feminist critique of development, with particular focus on gender as a key site of social difference, gender still remains overly marginalized in development studies. And I think we can likely all agree to this limitation, given the fact that we're all together today. So why is that? Why is gender repeatedly marginalized despite its proven importance time and again? Even with a multitude of important interventions made by feminist development scholars and critics, I would suggest that most gender and development research tends to fall into one of two categories. The first being the gendered context of inequality and poverty, and the second being the gendered outcomes from development interventions or economic change. Deeper insights into gender as process interwoven with so-called development remain a challenge. This is the entry point of this paper as I try to better understand gender not as context to or outcome from development, but integral at every stage. I examine gender roles and relations in particular. I want to clarify here that I view gender as one of many important forms of social difference. I am personally interested in decolonial and post-colonial intersectionality, and have recently published on this from the same research project, which is the paper that was just shared in the chat. And in this presentation, I am exploring gender specifically, but that is not to suggest gender to be a singular or isolated form of difference. I will briefly contextualize my study site for this research, which is based in a Hmong village in northern Thailand. There are currently over 4 million Hmong individuals living across the Southeast Asian Massif. Hmong are an ethnic minority population in China, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, and Burma. While there is a large global Hmong diaspora, a significant proportion of whom are in the United States, please note that for this paper and presentation, I am specifically referring to Hmong populations in the Southeast Asian Massif and northern Thailand in particular. Hmong populations within the Southeast Asian context have a tendency to dwell in highland areas, which refers to 1,000 meters above sea level or above. This tendency to live in highlands has often rendered the Hmong illegible to the state and been used to serve as justification for sedentarization policies or alienating Hmong populations from the ethnic majority of their respective countries. Hmong have a long history of fleeing wars, violence, and marginalization throughout the Massif, as well as migration movements chosen to live closer to family, natural resources, or for personal preference. The first records of the Hmong in Thailand are from the end of the 19th century. Most Hmong arrived in Thailand while fleeing the Indo-Chinese wars or the communist overtaken bordering Laos. Within the Thai borders, Hmong have both been villainized for engaging in conflict as signs of communist uprising or conspiracy, while also villainized for remaining neutral, which was projected as hiding counterinsurgency. Narratives of shifting cultivation or swidden agriculture have often been used to problematize Hmong mobility as an issue of security, while also blaming Hmong for environmental degradation seen to affect lowland ethnic Thai. Hmong are often presented as the epitome of the hill tribe problem in Thailand, which I return to on the next slide. In brief, the Hmong have a long history of marginalization and have demonstrated cultural, political, and economic resilience throughout centuries of oppression. Despite being repeatedly marginalized, both geographically as well as politically and socially, Hmong groups have remained independent and adaptable to these changes. Specific research on Hmong populations has demonstrated the resilience of their social-cultural identities, as well as the fluidity and flexibility of their livelihoods and life worlds, which are constantly being renegotiated across temporal contexts. Thailand is referred to as an ethnically homogeneous nation, with approximately 90% of the population considered of the ethnic Thai majority. This ethnic identity has played a large role in nation building, and as such, the populations that exist beyond this national narrative have endured many forms of marginalization, particularly since the renaming from the Kingdom of Siam to the Kingdom of Thailand in 1939. Hmong are one of the 8 hill tribes in the highlands of northern Thailand that are seen to go against the national identity. Within the context of a changing international political climate and ongoing nation building within Thailand, the discourse of a hill tribe problem emerged in the country in the 1960s. This discourse labeled highland populations as a threat to the Thai majority population. Hmong and other highland minority populations have experienced decades of state minority conflicts and tensions, including being villainized for their lack of loyalty to the Thai state, cultivating opium, and their environmental practices, and subsequently governmental and non-governmental interventions to fix this so-called hill tribe problem. The study site for my current research, which goes by the pseudonym Ban Sue, is a green Hmong village of approximately 600 people in Chiang Mai province and formally designated as within a protected forest area. For this research, I am able to draw on Jean Michaud's economic anthropology dissertation undertaken in the same village approximately 30 years prior as a means to draw out longitudinal change. Since the 1990s, the main income generating activity in Ban Sue has shifted from opium cultivation through tourism and vegetable production, and now nearly exclusively to orange tree cultivation. This livelihood shift is what prompted this research project as I sought to understand the drivers and implications of agrarian change and their socio-cultural impacts. Data collection has included 9 months of ethnographic fieldwork in Ban Sue from 2019 to 2023, using mixed methods including participant observation, a representative household survey, conversational interviews, oral histories, and photo voice. Before I progress, I would like to make a quick note on sexual orientation. All marriages in Bansue at the time of my fieldwork have been heterosexual couples involving a man and a woman, and therefore I use these terms in this presentation. It is beyond my scope to go into detail here, but I do want to note that a conversation of sexual orientation and gender identity within Hmong society is slowly beginning, particularly among the Hmong diaspora in the United States. Overall, Hmong society is deeply gendered. Productive and reproductive labor activities are gendered. Beliefs of the life and death cycle have gendered components. Socialization is highly gendered, and the distribution of power within households and beyond lies largely in men's hands. Hmong traditionally follow patrilocality, as couples tend to move in with the husband's parents upon marriage and live in the same village as the husband's clan. Social networks are strongly patrilineal, and among animist households, upon marriage, a woman leaves her natal clan to join her husband's clan and honor his family's ancestors. Hmong culture is accepting of polygyny, a form of polygamy whereby men are allowed multiple wives, but women are only allowed one husband. Common topics of conversation during fieldwork include gendered power inequities, gendered expectations of social behavior within and beyond the household, gendered labor distributions, and women's embodied safety, including violence against women. This is not to portray women as passive victims, and indeed I have written not to the contrary. Women form strong support networks for each other. Women individually and collectively share means of demonstrating resistance, both micro and macro forms of resistance. And many women who I encountered are actively working to raise conversations of gender roles and relations and women's rights. In analyzing approximately 30 years of change, livelihood orientations within the village have shifted near unanimously to orange tree cultivation. Bansue residents repeatedly report the village to be developed now, and that their present livelihoods and lifeways now meet the ambiguous standard of developed. In this research, I seek to understand not only how the drivers and impacts of this livelihood change, but how social difference is embedded within these transitions, and particularly gender. Unfortunately, given the length of this presentation, I do not have enough time to give an adequate overview of Hmong gender roles and relations in its proper complexity, or to present the entire paper. So instead, in the interest of time for this presentation, I will focus on 3 sites of change in particular. The first being household size and composition, the second being daughters-in-law and household roles, and the third being bride kidnapping and violence against women. The first example I explore is household size and composition. Hmong households are usually comprised of 2 or 3 patrilineal generations, usually at a minimum a man and his wife or multiple wives given polygyny, and their unmarried children. Previous estimates of household size in Bansue specifically came to 8 individuals per household in 1976, and an average of 10 individuals in 1992. My survey data in Bansue from 2020 reveals an average of 6 members per household, ranging from 1 to 13 members, in contrast to 1 to 23 members only a generation or 2 ago. As such, the sizes of Bansue households today are significantly smaller than observed in previous surveys. I attribute this in part to 3 sociocultural changes, which I discuss in turn. First, more sons moving out from their father's household. Second, fewer wives per adult man. And third, fewer children per marriage. Parents remain in charge of decision-making and family finances for the household, particularly the male household head, unless they intentionally ask for support from their children with this as they enter old age. As such, the household head, and/or in consultation with his wife, determines who will undertake which tasks each day, such as tending to which agricultural land, staying at home with young children, or driving to the market or to purchase agricultural inputs. This remains the case even upon adulthood and marriage for sons, so long as they stay within the household. As such, this is one of the motivating factors for some sons to move out and begin their own household. Sons moving out is a growing trend in the village today, with more and more adult men moving out from their parents' household with their wife and children. As I unravel in the paper, this has many sociocultural and economic considerations, including shifting monetary relationships within the household, the increased cash flow from orange cultivation alongside increased cost of living, and men's experiences as household head. Most households now only have a maximum of 1 married son living with them. While this not only contributes to smaller household sizes, it also raises questions surrounding inter-household relations, including intergenerational relations, and the role of daughters-in-law within the household specifically. I will return to daughters-in-law momentarily. Other sources of smaller household sizes are fewer wives per adult man and fewer children per marriage. While polygyny is culturally appropriate and even viewed as a sign of prestige or wealth among men, many women vocalize their fears and disinterest in their husband having more than one wife, which is contributing to fewer polygynous marriages. Moreover, men also cite the rising cost of living as not being able to afford multiple bride prices, but also the reduced need to have more than one wife, given that they no longer undertake shifting cultivation. As such, the very small percentage of polygynous households can be attributed to a combination and indeed an interaction of gender and agrarian considerations. Finally, there is a reduced number of children per marriage, which again is a factor of multiple interwoven processes. More sons moving out raises concerns about parents having enough agricultural land holdings to gift each son, which has political constraints that I stress in the paper. This, in combination with the rising cost of living, even despite increased incomes, are factoring into family planning decisions. Larger household sizes and living with extended family remain important culturally and is viewed very highly. Despite the sociocultural preference, these drivers outlined here are overall reducing household sizes across the village, with particular impacts on intra-household roles, relations, and distribution of wealth and labor. I turn to the role of daughters-in-law within the household as a more specific example. In an example of gender hierarchies, women in Bansue are expected to respect their husbands. However, daughters-in-law face compounded roles of serving their husbands and their husbands' parents, a position that has been reported in the literature as particularly burdensome. Indeed, my data set reveals that daughters-in-law are often in the most difficult household position, with a disproportionate burden of the household labor ascribed to them. In light of this, many women await the day their first daughter-in-law marries into the family, as the shift from being the daughter-in-law to a mother-in-law is a long-awaited moment when they start having another woman to support their labor. In the words of one 54-year-old woman, "All I want is a daughter-in-law. I have worked so hard for so long. I was the daughter in my parents' household, then the first daughter-in-law when I got married, and I worked so hard for my parents-in-law household for so many years. Now, even though I am old, I am still doing so much work and don't have anybody to help me. I just want a daughter-in-law so I can finally have someone to help me." While children, particularly daughters, are often expected to help their parents, this does not equate the expected labor of daughters-in-law, and many women associate marriage with taking on greater responsibility in labor. However, over the past generation or two, many women noted that the role of daughter-in-law is not as burdensome as it was previously. In the words of another woman, "When I first married, I woke up around 4 or 5 a.m. I had to get up early to chop banana trees to feed the pigs. But now we don't have any pigs and we don't have any swidden fields. We only work in the orange orchard. So all those duties from back then have disappeared. So for my daughter-in-law, all her duties are way easier. They're not hard. So my daughter-in-law wakes up after 6. I don't say anything to her because this generation, they like to sleep. I know when I was their age and I didn't have any kids, I like to sleep too, but I couldn't because I had to work at the swidden field every day. Now we changed our livelihood. The way we lived has changed from before. Working at the orange orchard is easier than the work back then. Now they have time to play with their phones. It's so different from before." As illuminated by this participant, the socio-cultural transformations that have fundamentally changed the household roles and expectations for daughters-in-law in Bansue are deeply interconnected with livelihood transitions, such as how agricultural transitions have also reduced livestock rearing and therefore a significant labor burden for women. Therefore, while the shift to smaller household sizes is based on many driving forces, including greater cash income and cash needs per household, and greater financial independence between parents and their sons, it can also be seen as both a gendered and livelihood source of intra-household change. After identifying a partner, Hmong marriages are instigated by the man through a tradition variously referred to as bride kidnapping, bride theft, or marriage by capture, which involves a multiple-day ceremony of taking the bride to the groom's house and beginning discussions for marriage arrangements. Typically, if the woman stays at the man's house for 3 nights, they are then to be married. This tradition has been practiced in many Hmong communities. However, there does not appear to be consensus in the literature on the exact means by which this occurs, including the woman's right to refuse or resist, the extent to which is it symbolic versus violent, or where it is observed and to what extent. I can confirm that in this location, bride kidnapping has been banned since approximately 2010. Most individuals who discuss this change with me likened it to development or modernity and an increase in women's rights, comparing bride kidnapping to the old ways of living. However, for many women in Bansue, having been kidnapped for marriage is a keystone moment in their life history. For some, it involved intense feelings of fear and sadness. For many, it was their first time encountering the village that is now their home and where they raised their family. And for others, it was their first time meeting who became their husband. As such, though the practice itself may now be banned in the village and thereby erased in narratives of developed, I suggest that bride kidnapping is still present in the village in terms of the living memories and experiences of the current population. Stemming from this, I further question what other forms of women's embodied safety get overlooked in focusing on development and sites of change. Gender-based violence holds a contested place in Hmong sociocultural literature. Gender-based violence is often portrayed as a stereotype of Hmong culture, overlooking the agency and resistance of Hmong women who are victim to this violence, as well as larger spheres of global patriarchy and power structures that cannot be boxed in as a Hmong problem. Therefore, while gender-based violence is indeed a problem that many women face in Bansue today and previously, I strive to preface women's voices, experiences, and agency, and emphasize the global problem of gender-based violence without ascribing any blame to Hmong society specifically. This is consistent with feminist approaches to power and social difference, which attends to the often paradoxical spaces of interlocking subjectivities. As detailed on the previous slide, violence surrounding bride kidnapping that is observed elsewhere in Hmong populations is no longer accepted in Bansue. However, gender-based violence more broadly is prevalent in Bansue today, most predominantly intimate partner violence. Many women shared that a certain degree of partner battering was commonplace, and there was nothing they could do to prevent it due to their subordinated status as women. In talking about a woman family member who was recently abused by her husband, one woman stressed the frequency of gender-based violence. If you're in a fight, men have rights and power, so men get to hurt women. Women don't have rights or power, so they cannot hurt men. Everybody experiences it. There is nobody who doesn't get beat up by their husband. If somebody says they don't get abused, that just means it doesn't happen very often, maybe only a few times, but there's nobody who has never experienced it. And while I cannot attest to the pervasiveness of violence against women to this extent, noticeable in this excerpt is how she attributes gender-based violence to men's superior power over women. However, despite these experiences, several women shared that excessive violence is not acceptable, often using the specific wording "no longer acceptable," implying that it was more acceptable previously. A common thread in discussions of domestic violence was not only the lack of its policing in Bansue specifically, but also the contrasts between the policing of other ethnic groups in Thailand and the lack of policing domestic violence among ethnic Hmong. These are important interactions between gender, violence, and ethnicity. Not only do many women in Bansue assume that domestic violence is unavoidable in their society, but these fears are being reified in a legal system that marginalizes them based on their ethnicity and location. Domestic violence and gender-based violence are global patriarchal problems. Not only have other ethnic groups, and often the literature, characterized this as a Hmong-specific issue, but many women and victims to domestic violence themselves have internalized this as a Hmong issue, often suppressing any notion that it can change. I therefore close with this example of the gendered tensions and inequities that persist, both simultaneous to and at times contradicting other forms of change and women's improved rights. I therefore join other feminist Hmong scholars that call for more critical discussion of Hmong gender beliefs, norms, and relations in their complexity and ongoing negotiation. In closing, this paper raises important new findings and ongoing questions. The examples presented here demonstrate the ways in which gender is interwoven with all forms and processes of development and change. As I argue elsewhere, Hmong woman is not a singular category, but socially uneven and differentially experienced across time and place. And therefore I ask, how can we better account for intersectional subjectivities and this extension of this work? How can we forefront gender without missing its uneven experiences? And building on this, and the last example in particular, what gender tensions and inequities persist alongside sites of change? Here I call for greater emphasis on balance between changes and continuities as a more holistic understanding of gender and longitudinality. And finally, how can we promote gender equity without creating any notion of the need to improve societies? And so to come back to this simplified graphic, this paper suggests new ways that we can consider gender as embedded within, interacting with, and co-producing so-called development. Such an approach identifies both gender transformations as well as gender tensions and inequities that persist. I argue that gender is more than context and outcome, but woven throughout all forms of livelihood, economic, and environmental change. And while I have focused on gender as a key site of difference, this thinking extends to multiple and interacting subjectivities. And so that is where I will finish for today. Thank you again to Maria Lisa and those at the Women in Gender and Development series for inviting me. I would also like to thank my research funders noted here on the slide, as well as all informants and respondents in the research. And thank you to everyone who attended for listening today, and I would welcome any comments and questions.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So I'm gonna ask people to, I haven't seen any questions come through in the chat. So unless I'm wrong, I have reviewed, I don't see. So please go ahead and raise your hand, or if you prefer not to speak, raise your voice. Please go ahead and put it in the chat. Oh, I see there's, Irenga has his hand up.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, Jennifer, yeah, super nice to see you again. And I'm super happy to see. I'm great work. Thanks for sharing this amazing work. So I missed some of your work, right? So after I moved from McGill, and I'd like to hear a little bit about your methods. So can you reflect on about your ethnographic style fieldwork in northern Thailand? I mean, what is your experience in Thailand, and how you dealt with the COVID pandemic? I know I'm pretty sure you experienced that as well. And what kind of challenges you experience, like the general, right?
That's a big question, and it's so wonderful to see you too, Arinda. Thanks for coming today. So I often describe myself as working primarily with ethnography and participant observation, as I believe so much in terms of trying to understand life worlds and experiential forms of knowledge sharing and embodied knowledge exists through a lot of those ethnographic methods. However, I also undertook a household survey, and part of the idea for this was that I thought that I was going to be able to draw some really direct comparisons with Jean-Michel's survey work in the same village 30 years prior. And so that was a bit of a funny but also telling result, was that almost every question on his survey was irrelevant by the time I did my initial fieldwork in the village. And so it demonstrated how fundamentally livelihoods and life had changed in the village since his work there. I also use a very qualitative approach to surveys. And so I work with both quantitative, but also a lot of qualitative data in that, and that it's a way of getting a lot of in-depth household level information, but also it's a great opportunity to ensure you're meeting with the diversity of individuals and perspectives across the village. I also did oral histories, which I really enjoyed having the chance, and a research project that was an appropriate method. And in particular, as so much of this is focused on longitudinality, oral histories was really fitting for my research objectives. I certainly dealt with COVID, as the bulk of my fieldwork was in 2020. So I had, lockdown in Thailand. I was very fortunate that with the way the pandemic unfolded, Thailand actually was in a post-COVID world for a lot of the latter of 2020. So I was actually given special permission by both authorities in the village, as well as the technical systems we have to go through at the university to return to fieldwork later in 2020, which was a wonderful opportunity. And then I was able to return this year as well. So I've had, yes, different fieldwork experiences at different times from basically 2019 to 2023. Yes, I'll move on to the next question because I'm sure I'm rambling, but happy to chat about any of that more as well.
Okay, so I have so Jacqueline, you're next, and then Larry.
Thank you, Jennifer. Your presentation was really very informative. It's an interesting research. I like your the richness in it, the tools that you've used. Maybe I'll have two questions for you. One, you mentioned that initially they were involved in opium cultivation. So I was wondering why opium, and how did they leave opium to took up orange cultivation? Then my second question is to do with intimate partner violence. How were you able to collect that information? Because it's rather very sensitive. People don't usually like sharing that kind of information. Thank you very much.
Thank you for both of those questions. They're very different questions, so I will go in the same order that you asked them. Opium cultivation is, in many parts of Southeast Asia, considered very stereotypical of Hmong populations. However, this is a very depoliticized history. And so in my dissertation, I'm able to offer more of the politics and the history of that. In particular, opium was actually facilitated at different points through different governments, and especially the Hmong population. I love the phrasing that President Livelihood uses, which is borders across, Hmong across borders or borders across Hmong, because Hmong populations have existed in what are now present day different countries well before the present demarcation of these borders. And so a lot of these histories are transnational, and so stemming back from Hmong opium cultivation in China. However, it was very harshly eradicated in Thailand, as well as ongoing in other parts of Southeast Asia. There's definitely still opium cultivation among Hmong populations in Thailand as well, but as to the extent of my knowledge, I'm not aware of any still being grown in my field site in particular. However, I do get into some conversation about other drug forms that are now affecting social cultural change as well as livelihoods in the village. So my answer basically is that both the onset of opium cultivation as well as the sharp decline are a very politicized history. And so I'll leave it at that because I'm not able to offer a complete history there. Regarding domestic violence, that's a really hard one. And I guess that kind of builds on Aranga's question as well, is fieldwork can be very dense, and you know, as I'm a very feminist scholar, I'm a very embodied learner and listener, and I really approach fieldwork open-hearted and open-minded, and so a lot of the conversations go where people are wanting to share. And so domestic violence was never originally part of topics that I kind of came in looking for, and it very quickly became a lot of what women started talking to me about. And so my Gender, Place and Culture article that came out this year has a bit of discussion on that, as well as the ethnicized politics of domestic violence among Hmong populations that I touched on today. But I can't really say more than just I was there to listen, and definitely had certain research questions and areas of focus, but in trying to understand life worlds and social difference, domestic violence was brought to me as part of that experience and those answers.
Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer. Larry, go ahead, and then I'm going to put myself up after Larry. So
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. You've documented a big agricultural shift into orange production, and one of your interviewees suggested there was also then a corresponding decrease in livestock production. So I'd like to know a little bit more about whether that transition into orange production followed the existing gender norms, or if it shook things up a little bit. Who controlled the land, the production, the money, and how the money was used? And if that drop in livestock production was directly related to the higher availability of cash to buy protein, or did even the diets change as a result of that transition? Thanks.
Yeah, so livestock, thank you for the question. Livestock rearing is, again, a very central part of a lot of Hmong livelihoods in rural areas in Southeast Asia. In particular, pardon me, are that of swamp buffalo and black pigs are very central to animist Hmong spiritual beliefs and play a significant role in a lot of Hmong diet and worshipping ancestors and in particular livelihoods. And so it was fascinating to, and so I guess I should have offered a bit more of my own subjectivity entering into this research. I have spent years, I'm very familiar living and working in Laos, which borders Thailand, and I've worked with Hmong populations in Laos specifically. And so that was one of the biggest shocks the first time that I entered into Bansue, was discovering that there's not a single buffalo in the entire village, as well as pig rearing is nearly non-existent, and even over the course of my doctoral studies, that's on a further decline. It has certainly shifted gender roles in terms of, I think one of the quotes I shared today was touching on this as well. Pig rearing was a huge role among women. It's very labor intensive, particularly like both collecting, but also preparing and delivering food to the pig pens is a significant and very laborious task. And so there is a combination of both more cash input available to buy meat, and there are 3 stores in the village that do sell meat, as well as just an exhaustion and less of an interest in how laborious it is to raise pigs. And this has definitely shifted local diets. Black pig meat was considered a Hmong delicacy, or it is considered a Hmong delicacy, and now this is saved for specific rituals. Many households might only have 1 pig that they save for Hmong New Year, or a specific event otherwise. And so it's definitely shifting a lot of the different questions that you asked there. Another thing is that horses were a big part of livelihoods at the time of Michaud's study in the same village, in terms of horses were used to carry products to and from the village from agricultural lands. However, now with basically, I forget the exact percentage, but approximately 80% of households now have a truck for carrying agricultural goods. And there's now an improved road down to the market. And so horses are now completely non-existent. Buffalo are completely non-existent, and only cows are only in about 6 households. And they're basically just kept in the forest as like a form of additional income generation, but no central part of livelihoods. So definitely a lot of changes in livestock rearing that have accompanied and been interwoven with agricultural changes as well.
Thank you.
So since I'm co-host, it won't let me raise my hand, so I'm raising it. Yeah, hello. So I want to follow up on one of what Arenga asked about, and then also the Jacqueline. So Arenga's question was about methods, and then Jacqueline was, how were you able to collect this intimate partner violence information? So I just want to make a push for the importance of, I love what you said, open-hearted, open-minded, and really I would say also qualitative and participatory methods, where you have the humility as a researcher to know that you are going to listen and learn from the people that you're studying, that you're learning from. And I want to give 2 examples where intimate partner violence gender violence came up that was totally unexpected, because my work does not focus on that topic. It's mostly agriculture. And one was in a focus group in Uganda, northern Uganda, northeastern Uganda. But it was a focus group where I often start, usually I have separate men and women's focus groups so they can share things that they won't share if it's a mixed group. But in this case, it was a mixed group. And I was asking, what were the changes that occurred in the last 10 years in agriculture, and how did it affect men and women differently? And the first and very excited response was from two like teenage girls who said, female genital mutilation has been banned in Uganda this year. And it was like, okay, so I wrote it on the chart. And that was not the question. And that was not really the topic of the project, which was about peanut farming and aflatoxins. But that was really important to them, and that made it on the timeline. And that, so creating a space, was very interesting. And then in Bangladesh, which I'm going back to this weekend, as you know, Jennifer, to follow up on this project, we had an IPM, Integrated Pest Management Project, which included trichocompost that is done in people's backyard. And women, because they spend most of their time there, were the ones that really were the experts on it and did a lot of the management of it. And the husbands would say, talk to my wife, she's the expert. So we did a study interviewing a lot of the men and women in the households. And what came out was what the literature calls soft indicators of empowerment. So rather than the economic indicators that are projects funded by USAID, which is what most of our projects are, mostly they track, increased income either through the sale of the trichocompost or tricholeachate or through improved vegetable production. But several women reported increased confidence, self-esteem, respect, and that their husbands beat them less, as linked to their participation in trichocompost. So that was not the question. We did not ask about that. But I think creating this space and listening and actually making note of what's important to people is just a really important thing that just doesn't happen in much research. And I think, in feminist research, it is perhaps more that you're trying to connect, but not even necessarily. You don't have to be a feminist researcher to use participatory and qualitative methods and listen to what people think is important. So.
And I think that there's a bit of a balance where I think a lot of people kind of shy away from, there's this huge focus on positionality and researcher subjectivity, but then I also think there's a bit of a shying away from the emotions and the affect of fieldwork, because fieldwork is a privilege and we are very lucky to get to do what we do. And there are definitely different axes of power between researchers and participants. And so I think because there is a lot of that critique, that then people actually do tend to shy away from just being a human in the field I'm a human geographer and I'm a human in that. And I think that there's two pieces that are coming to mind in particular that number one is Sarah Moser's paper in area that was just about where's personality in talks of positionality, and truly who we are is more about just listing off any objective identifiers of forms of difference, but actually who are we when we enter the field. And another one actually just crossed my site this morning, so I haven't even read it yet, but I was excited to see Judith Keller just had a paper as well on the I believe it's on emotion in fieldwork and so forth that just came out today, and I'm excited to read that. And I think that it should be a bigger topic. I think that and it's definitely something that I write into my research very openly. And even the gender, place and culture paper that I had published, one of the reviewers was saying that it was very effective talking about domestic violence. And so I went the route of having a little note to readers, okay, there's some explicit conversation to come, but as you say, truly trying to understand the life worlds and life views of the people that I'm researching with is also, as you say, allows topics to come into the work that we don't know coming. And that's part of the whole point of fieldwork, is that if we knew the answers, we wouldn't be doing it to begin with. So seeing what emerges for sure.
Great. Thank you. So I have two questions and comments from Jessica Spence and Nashaba Zafar. So Jessica says, great work, Jennifer. I enjoyed your presentation. Earlier, you mentioned using photo voice. Was that on another project? And if so, how did it impact your understanding of these overall issues?
So that is the same project, and I actually did photo voice for the first time this year, and it was something that I thought could, in my follow-up fieldwork, could help to get at more inter-household dynamics and so forth, that I thought would really be complementary to my pre-existing data set. I didn't find it particularly successful in this context. I think that there was, it's something that I would say I'm still kind of working through what I did find and also what I didn't through photo voice. I'd say is where I leave that one right there. And I think the visualization is fascinating. It's also, like in this field site, phones are completely ubiquitous. And so I thought from a technological standpoint, that there would be a bit better ease with the task. But I would say almost every single person that I asked to participate said, let me just tell you. And so the interest of actually doing the photos was not there. I definitely had a couple of people, you know, okay, once they were committed to the task, it was really fascinating to see what came from that. And even the people who never took a photo, hearing the responses that came up to those, the framing of the questions with photo voice in mind, was really interesting data. But I wouldn't say that it was a particular success with this current study. And I'm sorry, there was a second part to that question and I forget what it was.
How did it impact your understanding of these overall issues?
I would say that it's, you know, when you're that deep into a doctoral dissertation, I think that everything is a constant or slow expansion. And so I didn't find photo voice changed anything significantly, but it was new ways of asking questions and new ways of having those questions answered. And one thing that was, everybody that had already participated in the household survey 3 years prior, and so that also was about, you know, I did this before and now I'm interested in asking in other ways, and so people definitely understood it was a different way of asking questions and sharing knowledge. And so yes, but I have to say that the interest was not there, and obviously it's not my role to force a method onto participants.
Okay, so the other question is from Noshaba, and she says, thanks, Jennifer, for sharing your experience and research. I was wondering, what was the reason to pick this community in Northern Thailand?
So that is I guess a twofold answer. So as I mentioned, I had previous experience living in Lao, and I speak Lao. And then I decided for my master's research that I really wanted a very different setting and to explore some similar ideas that I was interested in, but to really shake up context and culture and people in place, right, as a human geographer. And so given the fact that I speak Spanish, that's what took me to the Peruvian Amazon. And the fact that I am an embodied researcher, Southeast Asia is closer to family and what would enable me to do long-term field work. So I speak pretty decent Thai, and definitely by the end of my field work, that's what got me to that much better of a level of Thai to undertake the fieldwork. But then the second tier to that question, it was when I was exploring potential opportunities for doctoral work that I got in touch with my current supervisor, who's Sarah Turner at McGill. And Sarah and Jean have collaborated, and so that's when she shared with me that Jean had always had this idea of a bit of a follow-up study in the same village, given that he had gone back to visit a few times over the years and had noticed some of these changes. And so that's what made me know that so much of this was occurring. And so I went in 2019 for an initial fieldwork visit and to kind of focus in on my research questions. But that's what got me to that very specific village, was knowing that there was almost a baseline study. And as I mentioned, it didn't end up being a very neat longitudinal analysis, which is too perfect because life is not neat in transition. So.
Okay, do we have any more questions or comments, conversations? Okay, so we're coming to the end of our time. So Jennifer, do you want to say any closing thing, or I'll give my little, oh, let's see. So Nashaba says, thanks, Jennifer. I have experience of living in Thailand for more than a decade, and I've been observing the indigenous communities and how they are different than mainstream Thai society. That's why I was interested to know your selection. So it's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Okay, well, let me do my little closing spiel. So thank you all for attending, and thank you, Jennifer, for a wonderful presentation. We're sharing, Shreya shared the link for a short survey, so please fill it out. And I do want to announce our next event, which is on November 9th. Dr. Sana Elahe is an assistant teaching professor at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, and she'll be talking about gender negotiation of urban spaces among transgender persons in Pakistan, dismantling the colonial binary. So do not miss this one. That one will be both in person in the library here at Virginia Tech and on Zoom, so it's hybrid. And check our website for more information, and let us know in the survey if you want to be added to our listserv to get updates on future events. So have a wonderful day or evening if you are in a different time zone, and we hope to see you on November 9th. And thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thanks again, everyone.